what we do have is we got sort of two options. We have a presentation that we've been giving on, legislation, what happened last session, where we're heading. We're happy to either give the presentation or just answer questions, whichever.
I think both. Both, I think, because this is really the first meeting. Well, the first formal meeting. We did meet a little bit this summer. We met with some of our legislators, and we had taken the Rural Schools Association, taken their paper, and kind of adopted the top 4 points that they had, and then met with some of our legislators and ran that by them. So that was our preliminary start. So what we
good night. Hey, thank you,
there,
Marlon.
Jim.
I see the one. Thank you. Thank you.
So what we'd like to do, John, is this is really our first stop at creating our legislative paper, the Oneida-Madison-Herkimer School Boards Institute legislative paper. So we're looking for your leadership to tell us what you think of the hot issues. And this, I mean, I gotta tell you, I'm really with the money running around and the new mandates, and this is a year that I'm kind of out there. I don't know what's going on really. So looking forward to if you can shed some wisdom and some light on our on help us to understand where we should be going would be great.
Absolutely. We're more than happy to do that. And once we get started, if everyone doesn't mind, I'll share my screen so I can bring it up, and then we're happy to answer some questions. So
Okay.
we'll kick off whenever you like to get
Okay.
started.
So Charlie, have you given him ability to share his screen?
Charlie?
He should be, he should be able to share a screen, so I'm
Fantastic.
here
Alright.
just in case.
Cool.
And hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good, Jim.
Great. And thank you, John, for helping us out. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. More than happy to.
You're a good man.
Well, we have a great group here, so we're happy to be with you.
Well, good. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we did say 4 o'clock. So, John, if you would start off, since we have a fairly small group, would you mind if people ask questions as you go along?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Good. Okay.
So I'm just going to share my screen here. Just let me know if everybody can see it. Everybody
Yep.
see the perfect. And let's get this going. All right. So thank you for having me. I'm John Daly from the New York State School Boards Association, and I'm joined by my colleague, Alicia Artessa, also from our governmental relations team. Alicia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Alicia Artessa here from NYSBA. I started in November of last year, so almost a year, and I'm actually from Ilion, New York. So I'm very familiar with your district.
Get out of here. CBA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was at Ilion High School. I predated the merger.
We understand that.
But yeah, so I'm happy to be here supporting my local hometown.
Thank you.
Of course.
Well, we're going to kick it off. This presentation will cover 2 topics. Feel free to jump in with questions, and we're happy to answer some after. We'll give you an update on legislation from last session, priorities going into this session. Feel free to glean some ideas from that. And we'll also be talking a little bit about advocacy and how you can be an advocate for your interests, which I think aligns well with our goals today. So without further ado, this is a quick overview of the state budget. The state budget had the largest single funding of education, at least in the modern history of the state. There was a $3 billion and change increase in state aid, which included a $1.4 billion foundation aid increase. Most importantly in that was the commitment by the legislature to fully fund foundation aid within 3 years. A good starting place for advocacy going into the next legislative session, which will begin with the State of the State by Governor Hochul in January, would be to really press the legislature to fulfill that commitment. We have every reason to believe they will, but it never hurts to put a little pressure either. And at the same time, we saw an influx of stimulus funding over the last year and a half, 2 years, $12 billion to be precise. That came through 3 separate acts of Congress that were signed into law under the Trump and under the Biden administrations. And we are currently advocating for a 4th package. This is the infrastructure and reconciliation package I'm sure you've heard about. No particular update on if that includes any kind of education funding, but it certainly does include funding for infrastructure upgrades from what we are hearing. And hopefully those infrastructure upgrades will be enacted and districts will be able to benefit from it. We will certainly keep everybody posted. Something else that we have been advocating for, particularly on the federal level, but there was state funding, is bridging the digital divide and bringing access to the internet and to quality internet service to districts across the state. That's another thing that would be a great priority to bring up this year, to push for additional funding for broadband services. I think we all got an education in that over the past year with what has been happening with hybrid learning. And we've all seen for some districts, it's come easier than others. And districts that require better access to broadband, I know are looking for a solution. And this is funding, I think, is key to that solution. So in terms of actual legislation outside of the budget, what was signed into law so far this year, we had a 2-year extension of contract piggybacking for local governments. That's the ability of, for instance, a school district to jump on a contract for services with the town or the county. We were happy to see that extended for an additional 2 years. We reset the school board petition threshold back to the calculation for voter turnout levels. You may recall the governor or the former governor had signed an executive order reducing that threshold during the 2020 election cycle. That's now been reset. We saw a law to include COVID-19 within the definition of illness for school district and BOCES absentee ballot applications. A law to eliminate the requirement that school districts complete their APPR for the current year, which at the time was 2020 to 21. I think that was something everybody was very happy to see. And another law which affects a number of districts across the state, just about 100. You may have heard of districts, or you may have districts who use small group health insurance pools. The Affordable Care Act risked pushing consortiums with 50 to 100 members out of their consortium. That was fixed by a law that was passed in 2015 to allow groups of 1 to 100 members to remain in their consortium. And we were happy to see that extended for an additional 3 years through the end of 2025. So what has been passed, but not yet delivered to the governor, in terms of priorities for last session, right now there's one bill we're watching. Most of them have been signed at this point. This is a bill that would provide school districts with improved access to the statewide immunization database. That bill sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. We get a lot of questions on it. Doesn't have anything to do with COVID or the COVID vaccine, as the name may suggest. This is actually just a simple fix, really for school nurses to make the job of general immunizations much easier. Alicia, would you say that's an accurate characterization?
Yeah, so that bill actually, it just kind of fixes this oversight that school nurses are not allowed to download the data online at this time based on just some antiquated law that's on the books. They have to manually input paper immunization records, and it's just a huge hassle. Nurses are struggling as it is. And basically they spend all summer at this point putting the data in for each individual student rather than just downloading from an email. So this bill would just fix that. We haven't heard from the governor's office, but we did have a meeting 2 weeks ago with their council, and we brought it up again, and they were like, "Oh, right, okay, maybe." So I'm hopeful they weren't mean about it. So that's all you can hope for with those guys. So
Usually
hopefully
good.
the next few weeks. Yeah, exactly.
And this is sort of just a general PSA. We have 3 bills currently. We're hoping that will go to the governor's desk that would authorize health insurance reserve funds for a number of districts. The 3 we have this year are Depew, Liverpool, and Carmel. If you have a local need, whether that's an insurance fund or some other financial ability, something of that nature, that you need authorization from the state for, we're always happy to help draft and advocate for that legislation as we did with these districts. So always feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to help. So what is being worked on as we go into the next legislative session, which we'll cover over the next 2 slides? COVID-19 is going to be front and center as it has been. I think we're all hoping for an end to the pandemic in the near future. But there's no doubt that it will continue to be a top priority for the state legislature, for the governor's office, and for local governments, especially school districts. There's lots of different legislation that has stemmed from COVID and will stem from COVID, especially now that we're back in a normal environment where the governor does not have emergency powers and acts of the legislature will be required to do most things from here on out, barring the reinstatement of those powers. So whether it's relief funding or it's different measures that may be implemented, we're going to continue to keep our membership updated on COVID. Major priority, I think, for most local governments, school districts and otherwise, are IDAs and pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. Most local governments, in our experience, would like to see more transparency in that area. Doesn't necessarily mean they're opposed to IDAs or opposed to pilots, but if the tax base is going to be affected or the tax revenue to the local government is going to be affected, we've always strongly advocated for additional transparency, more notice to the local governments. For instance, when a new pilot is implemented, there's a number of pieces of legislation out there right now on this topic, most of which we are supportive of. And that is a good topic to advocate on. It has a lot to do with cost savings and a lot to do with simply knowing, what your budget horizon is going to look like, what your revenue horizon is going to look like. Small group health insurance, we discussed, that's something we'll continue to push to extend. Alicia, would you like to speak to child safety zones and lead?
Of course, yeah. So for the child safety zones, there's a few bills out there. And typically we do like to support if a district has a bill on basically having control over their safety zones. So the speed limit around the schools. So if you ever have an issue with that, please reach out to us. We do work on those bills pretty much every year. And then for lead in school water, the testing requirement that was implemented in 2016, there's been some backlog with COVID and everything in the pandemic. So they're still trying to figure that out, but they did pass a bill this year. It has not been signed at this time, and I'm not sure that it will be signed at this point. We're still seeing basically to strengthen the requirements, which we did have a lot of conversations with the legislature and the governor's office on that. We think the system as it's currently implemented was doing a really good job. It's something like 92% of schools were having, their threshold to meet the required DOH standard. So, the schools that are working really hard to clean their water and make sure that there's no lead in it, we're doing that. So we're kind of hoping that they just don't sign that bill. But at this time, the bill that passed, the version, we did get a lot of amendments to it to make it more palatable and just made sure that we were given fundings, because obviously unfunded mandates are never, no one ever likes those, but we really made sure to open up a whole new pool of funding through the Environmental Protection Fund. So if it does go into effect, there will be some new money available to schools, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, and mandate relief is critical. I think all local governments would agree on that. And we continually advocate for mandate relief. Always a good topic to advocate on as school districts, to express something you don't like that's coming down, or a potential mandate or an existing mandate that maybe you'd like to see lifted. Tax cap reform. This issue is one that is obviously tricky and one that is complicated. It's been difficult for local governments to live in a tax cap environment over these past 7 years. At the same time, you do have some local governments who I think would say there's certain benefits to the tax cap. But without getting to the merit of whether the tax cap is good or bad or somewhere in between, one thing we've focused very heavily on is the CPI calculation and the 2% cap itself. As you all know, right now, the annual allowable increase is the lesser of 2% or CPI. CPI has fairly consistently fallen under 2%, which in effect can reduce the amount a district can potentially increase taxes or look for a tax increase year over year, and can create what's called a negative tax cap. So our advocacy is primarily focused on that negative tax cap issue and providing some relief in that fashion to prevent the negative tax caps where the CPI falls under the 2%. Always something that it's good to advocate on. Schools as polling places, sort of two prongs to this issue. The security of the school building with people coming in and out. We've continually pushed for increased security measures to make sure that people aren't wandering around the building. And then secondly, days off for voting, and finding a format for that doesn't affect the school calendar. Special act school districts, we have a number of members who are special act school districts, and we continue to push for funding for them. The state retirement incentive, this is something that we heard a lot about last year. You may recall that during sort of the height of COVID, the legislature in the budget last March did put a retirement incentive in place for New York City. It was not done statewide. It was considered for a statewide application, and at the time it was decided that was not particularly beneficial by the legislature. That being said, our job as a member-driven organization is to advocate for the interests of our members. So we'd love to hear from our members on whether or not they would like to see a retirement incentive. Certainly, we've heard a split of opinions for everybody else, but at a minimum, I think it's something that could come up again this year, and it's something we'll continue to update our members on and look for direction. Local bills, I mentioned the insurance reserve funds. Always feel free to come to us with local specific needs, and we're happy to help you through the legislative process.
Hey, John, I have a question for a moment, if I could. Could we go back one slide?
Sure.
I have a couple of questions on this. For the small group health insurance, that's been dragged along, and I agree that it's a good kick to the can this time, as opposed to just a dribble down the road. What is the problem with making that permanent? We've got a lot of small schools up in this area who, through no fault of their own, God forbid if somebody forgets about this issue when something lapses.
Yeah, we had initially advocated this year, and I agree with you, for a bill that would make it permanent. And we've done that a few times now. I think we'd like to see it made permanent because it's kind of
Well, it must be 6 or 8 years now. I mean, maybe Jim knows.
Yeah, Robert, it's a no-brainer. I think it's been 8 years. It's just been re-up, but it's ridiculous. You're right.
Yeah, and it's crazy how long it's dragged out. And I think this was the third or the fourth time they had to reauthorize it. In terms of why it's not being done on a permanent basis, we really don't have any specific knowledge of that from the legislature, other than So I worked in the Senate and the Assembly. Alicia worked in the Senate. Actually, we worked in the Senate together. We can sort of tell you, you know, anecdotally, they just don't like doing things on a permanent basis. They kind of always want the option to decide they don't want to extend something. Other than that, we don't have a particularly good reason, but
At least 3 years is much better.
3 years is better than we had. The law that we were supporting or the bill is the one that actually was signed into law. It was amended from permanent to 3 years, but I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
One of the things, I'm sure this is just broad-based for everybody, the foundation aid, when they do come around with that, they've got to get new basis numbers, you know, bring it into perhaps even this century or this decade worth of numbers.
We agree.
And the other thing that's not on here, maybe it will be, but as long as I have your ear, Governor Hochul extended the ability to do video board meetings, and then left it up to each board, which I think is a good idea. I mean, if we can get that law changed so that a couple of things, you would leave it up to each board to do. You don't, and you wouldn't have to say somebody goes to Florida for a few months a year. You wouldn't have to allow, you know, the neighbors into your living room that they could still watch this. You know, we've had a tremendous dry run for this, but changing a couple of elements of that law, you know, if you could get people, especially in New York, to allow you to video in for however many, 3 or 4 meetings, you could get some older members of the community who have a tremendous wealth of knowledge to bring to the school district, that because of this, it precludes them from not being able to, or even wanting to run for a school board.
Yeah, I agree. We advocated for, and that's a good topic to bring up, sort of as a summary of what happened in the special session that happened 2 weeks ago. The legislature did put in place, and the governor did sign, the ability to continue the virtual meetings through January, I believe it's 15th of 2022. We consistently hear about both of those issues that you raised, the notification requirement, you know, where am I zooming in from, and then the public attendance in general. This law does allow for the public attendance. I think to your point on the small group health insurance, this is a similar, sort of in a similar vein. This is probably something, and as a membership organization, we need direction from our members through our business meeting in the fall before we could advocate on a specific topic. But just taking a pulse of people and seeing where they're at, I think a lot of people would like to see this done on a permanent basis, where you can always have this ability for a snowstorm, that sort of thing. In terms of the notice requirement, that's something we're acutely aware of. It's another thing we're waiting for direction from the business meeting on. I think it's probably going to be overwhelmingly, people want to be sure that the public's not going to show up at their home.
People don't know that, but as soon as, I mean, I've been at meetings at Remsen where somebody was deployed to the service, and they were on the school board, and, you know, had kids in school, and perhaps through their deployment, they may have been able to do it. You know, so there's many aspects of it. The one other aspect of it that's burdensome for a small school, and maybe with a better tweak of language would be more accessible, is to transcribe a meeting. Now, I'm certainly, you know, not 100% tech savvy, and there might be a great way to do this automatically, but to have your clerk or some other clerical staff transcribe a whole meeting without being requested. If you did it by request, or if you could run it through some kind of automated Google, you know, Translate, even if you don't get the words 100%, neither is your clerical staff. But even reducing that burden so that you're still allowing access to hard of hearing or whoever else would also be helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll tell you, I think this bespeaks a chronic problem in statutory drafting in New York State, which is a lot of times these bills are drafted with language that's relevant to technology and in the 1980s or the 1990s, and true to form for the government, I guess. And I think that's a real issue. These things need to be not even just updated on a spot basis, but drafted in a way that can grow and change with technology. It's something we're certainly aware of. And, it's the same thing with the notice requirement. You want to draft these things in a way that is acceptable in terms of public policy, that is reasonable in terms of public policy. And I agree with you. The technology issue in and of itself, it's something we could certainly advocate for legislatively. In terms of the notice issue, that is something that I know the legislature is aware of. They are aware of the concern about disclosing, where you're zooming from. And hopefully they will do some tweaks this session. I would be surprised if they didn't do some kind of tweak, especially if they had to extend this. There's also an appetite among some members of doing it on a permanent basis. And I think that would be a part of maybe a permanent bill versus this, temporary extension.
Yeah,
I mean,
any help would be appreciated, John.
Yeah, I do like the governor's allowing you to do it, but I also think I do like the governor leaving up to each school district, to say, look, yes, we might be able to do this, but you've got to give 72 hours notice to the superintendent to set everything else up. Otherwise, if you're gonna miss a meeting, you're gonna miss a meeting. You don't mind being accommodating, but let's locally decide how much burden it is to our local administrators to accommodate that.
And we would certainly agree. I think in 9 cases out of 10 with any issue, local option is the best option. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anytime. So looking forward a little bit more, the state and local tax deduction is something that's been a top priority for us. That's more of a federal priority, and we've certainly been advocating for that with during our congressional meetings this summer. The SALT deduction was capped at $10,000 in 2017. We'd like to see that cap removed or at a minimum extended. We have heard from the members of Congress we've been meeting with that this is something that's being discussed and included in at least initial talks over the infrastructure package, but that, how DC goes, that means it's not done till it's done, basically. We'll continue to keep people updated on that, but at the same token, on the state level, the state only has limited authority in this area as it is federal taxes, but what we can do is continue to advocate for various workarounds. SALT has really, it's not only impacted middle-class homeowners, which are most people in the state of New York, but it's affected revenue for local governments. So we'll continue to advocate strongly on that. We discussed the digital divide and virtual open meetings. One thing that we will also continue to push for, and that you could push for going into session, is the expansion of shared services at local option. That's critical. The ability to do things like piggybacking, but even further than that, it's all very dictated by law, which services can be shared, contracts up to what amount. We'd like to see that expanded for local governments who want to utilize it and as a cost saving measure. So there's always bills to do this, that, or the other in that area. And those are always good things to advocate for. And then, of course, we discussed the negative tax cap issue. Alicia, do you want to speak a little bit about advocacy?
Sure. So I'll just go through these next couple slides here fairly quickly. I know time is of the essence, and I'm sure everyone knows about our process, but just to give you an overview. So we, as advocates and a membership organization, we send out our resolution survey in the spring, and then you all respond to that. And that's basically through that process is how we figure out what we're going to advocate for in the upcoming session. So the resolution submissions were due in July. We had the resolution committee meeting this past August, and then the business meeting will be held in October. We are encouraging members to send a delegate because it's always helpful to have representation. So if you're not already going or you don't have someone going, let us know. Go to the next slide, John. And so once a resolution is adopted, it becomes an official NYSBA position, and they stay active for 5 years unless there's something going on that they're rescinded or changed. And then all active NYSBA positions are listed in our statement brochure, which is what we use as kind of our basis when we go and meet with legislators and elected officials and their staff. We have it all in like a concise setup for them to basically use as like a table of contents of education issues. And then for the advocacy liaison program, so this is like the person that you designate to receive invitations from our coworker Danielle. She runs this program, and that's for if you want to have a lobby day or a congressional meeting or some sort of event that you want NYSBA to help you with. That's pretty much the person that's in charge of it. How about that digital divide, right?
Yeah.
We're all
I'm
losing
sorry, I have no idea what happened there. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. My internet goes down a lot actually when I'm on Zoom.
It's funny, actually, every time we talk about the digital divide issue, that happens like every single. It's. I'll bring the presentation back up here.
Thank you.
Usually it's our Wi-Fi that cuts out, so it happens to us all the time.
It's a Monday. That's all I can say. Sorry.
All right.
And we
Yeah.
can
So
drop these links in the chat as well, and we'll send out the presentation.
perfect. All right. So for the, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out my screen here. For the liaison program, I'm sure some people have a liaison or want to become a liaison, you can check out the website that we put in here. And Danielle's really, really helpful. If you need to have a lobby day or whatever, we set those up pretty frequently. So the next slide. So for the advocacy process and how we inform and support member advocacy, we send out updates and alerts. We have our Take Action email campaigns, which are really, really helpful. We actually had one for the salt deduction, and I think every single day I get 5 emails that somebody has clicked that Take Action campaign. So those are always helpful. We do our Capitol Conference every year. On board, our publication, they cover all recent and current events. And then our executive director, Bob Schneider, will send out his weekly message, which we've heard from members a lot that they find it very helpful, his like Sunday debrief. And then our webinars, hopefully everyone's attended 1 or 2 of those, and our lobby days, of course. And if you ever need a legislative meeting with your representative, we're happy to set those up and attend and facilitate for you. And then any sort of issue, if you have something that comes up and you need research or help, we're happy to help. And our legal department, it's also really good about doing research for members on a pretty much daily basis. And then if you have any questions, you can reach out to us or Brian. He just got back from his paternity leave today, so I'm sure he's happy and waiting for more emails to come.
And we're happy to answer any questions right now you might have.
You're gonna send this out, John, you're gonna send this out. This is Doug. You're gonna send this whole question and paper out to Charlie so she can forward it to us.
That's right. We'll send it along to her
Okay, thank you.
anytime.
And what are you hearing on the convention itself?
I
Well,
think we're gonna find out this week. I heard a rumor that they'll decide, I think Thursday or Friday, whether or not they can still do it in person.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. Yes.
Yeah.
and as of right now, I mean, officially speaking, the plan hasn't changed. So until we hear otherwise, that's where we're still on the same trajectory. So we'll know more, I would imagine, as Alicia said, over the course of the week.
Okay, thank you.
John, this is Tom Moats. I have a couple of questions, if you would. So we've been talking about this full phase in of the foundation aid formula, which is a real good thing. But, you know, the devil's in the details. And all of our districts have lost students. Our populations have gone down. And so depending on how the foundation aid formula is readjusted, it could be good for us, or it could potentially be really bad for us. Are there particular approaches to this? You know, so we can advocate for full phase in of the foundation aid, but it would be, I think, it would be better for us to advocate for a particular approach that's fair, that's consistent, that's predictable, all those kinds of things. Is there a particular group that's doing this, or are there particular groups that we should be aware of that are advocating for a way to phase in this foundation aid?
So we certainly are, and NISBA is a good place to start. You know, we also have other groups, NICET, and different people who benefit from it. What I'm happy to do is I'll probably connect you with Brian Fessler. He's sort of our point person on foundation aid, and he could probably speak more in specifics about it. But I would say, you know, at a minimum, we've heard that pretty consistently. That's something that it's not one size fits all. This was a good first step, but I think everybody wants to see a formula that works for everybody. And I'm sure as time goes on, you know, there'll be specific fixes that districts are going to want to see. A lot of groups are going to want to see. So what I'm happy to do, Brian's email is here, Tom. If you want to drop your email in the chat, I'll have him reach out to you, and he can probably walk you through maybe some other advocacy groups or routes on it.
Okay. Another question is the digital divide. That's something that when we talk to legislators, we get some traction. They understand that because they hear that from not only schools, they hear that from, you know, all kinds of different people that the digital divide's an issue. How are there particular groups that you know of that help us to understand what is our access in Oneida County, what's our access in Herkimer County, for us to be able to quantify that, and or what's a solution? Our legislators like to hear us that when we say, here's, you know, the digital divide's a problem for us, and here's what we'd like you to do to help solve that. You know, are there any, can you point us to any resources like that for the digital divide to help us understand how big the issue is for us in particular areas and a possible solution for it?
I can answer that one for you, Thomas. So for the last year's budget process, there were 2 bills included in the language that address the digital divide directly. One of which is, I think, more important, the mapping bill. So essentially how it works right now, the FCC is in charge of mapping, and they mapping who has broadband, where the access lies, and what utility or what internet service provider is the provider in that region. However, there's a huge loophole at the federal level where basically if you do it on block by block basis. So if one house at the end of the block has Wi-Fi from, let's say, Spectrum, they count that entire like city block.
Yeah, that's what
So
we're hearing.
even though it's not accurate. So the state has taken the initiative to basically fund and establish their own map and study at the PSC. So the Public Service Commission in New York will be studying, they're probably already starting it, and then releasing a mapping setup. So we've been bringing this up in our federal meetings every time we have them of, we need the FCC to change their standards. They need to close this loophole, but obviously federal government works even slower than state government.
So that's interesting. You see this as a federal issue, not a state issue.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Because the internet service providers basically are not being held accountable, and it's all at the FCC. The FCC is really who mandates and regulates this issue, but we have enough clout as New York State that if we do this mapping bill and we're a big enough place that it'll really shine a light on this discrepancy. So hopefully once that comes out, that'll be really helpful. Anecdotally, I have Spectrum. You can run like your own diagnostic test at your house through the website. If you, and I think most of the bigger providers have that option. So I did that during COVID because my internet was constantly like dropping at every second. And I was running at like 10 megabytes per second download speed and like 2 megabytes per second upload speed, which is not even the federal standard of 25 and 10 or 25 and 3. So if you do that and then you call them, they'll fix it for you. But you can also just use that when you're talking to your legislators. Like, I just did it on my personal computer and here's my status, and it's horrible.
Yeah, and they're aware that, and on top of that, that, you know, mine can be fine, but my next door neighbors can not be, and or vice versa, exactly, because of those mapping issues. Now, you had mentioned Senate 4962 or Assembly 5062, the healthcare bills. Where are those right now? Are they in process? Have they been voted on? Where are those?
The small group bills?
Yes, yeah, because that's a big issue for a lot of the school districts in our area.
They've been signed into law. So they were signed, I want to say, in July.
Okay.
But yeah, so that it is a 3-year extension though. So it does go till 2025, or basically the way it was supposed to expire in 2022. Now it'll expire in 2025. Without another reauthorization. But as great as it is that those were signed into law, and we're grateful for that, you know, I think we'd all like to see a permanent extension, and we'll continue to push for that. And
agreed. I misunderstood. I thought they were waiting for a signature or something. So that's good that they've been implemented then. Okay, those are all the questions I have right now. Anybody else?
well, we're also
Just wish Brian well, and hopefully he can get some rest now that he's back to work.
Yeah.
well, we'll certainly send a presentation out, and I'm going to drop our emails in the chat as well as the links from the presentation. I should be able to send those out right here. And we're always available to answer any questions that you might have. We're always available for that. Let me get one more link here, then I'll put our emails. Alicia, if you want to put your email in there while I'm doing this.
Was yesterday the first day back to school for you guys, or Wednesday? I know every school is different.
Yeah.
We went back last Tuesday.
Oh, wow.
A lot of us went back Tuesday. Rome, I know, is coming back this week. They had some local issues, but I think most of the schools were Tuesday.
Oh, good.
In this area anyway.
Well, we hope everything's going well, and we're also happy to, as school goes on, as things change, hopefully they don't change too much, but we're here as a resource, whether it's the legislature or SED or anything else. We're always here.
So state what, John, can you give us a view statewide? So, I mean, there's kind of this storm. We're all, I think, a little bit apprehensive about these storms coming our way, about mask mandates, vaccinations, critical race theory. You know, there's a whole bunch of things where people are very, very passionate about. Are those things, what's the state of New York State and schools? Are there particular areas that issues are hot spots on, or what's going on out there that maybe we don't see in the news?
So we frankly probably don't know a whole lot more than you do, other than taking a pulse on, what is controversial. Those issues in particular, the masking and the vaccines, are certainly something that are not only on SED and Department of Health's radar, but they're, front and center. We don't really know a whole lot right now, only because with the transition of administrations, I don't think anybody totally knows what Governor Hochul is going to do yet. I think, Alicia, what we have been hearing is there was a bit of a back and forth over if she had statutory authority to do certain things with regard to the masking. Sir, just by way of background, you remember the Governor Cuomo had emergency powers. Those emergency powers had to be authorized by an act of the legislature. That act was repealed in June. So those emergency powers no longer exist. The only powers the governor does have are her normal powers to direct Department of Health or state ed to do certain administrative actions, which are very limited in scope. Most things here on out will require an act of the legislature. So that leads to the obvious question of, how do you respond to events as they unfold while the legislature is out of session? And the real answer to that is there is no good answer, other than you have to call the legislature back or try to do something through Department of Health or state ed within the bounds of what the current authority is thought to be. I think the conclusion that was reached on the masking was there wasn't a statutory authority to do that. Is that right, Alicia? So they had to.
So they went through the Department of Health versus
Right.
just the governor doing it herself. So the Department of Health issued the regulations, I think probably like a week plus ago.
Yeah.
Thankfully for us, one of my very close friends is the health council. So he sent them to us a few hours early, which was nice.
Inside.
We didn't have to read them at Friday at 5 like everybody else.
They were big, thick.
Yeah. So the mask requirements are, happening. Obviously, hopefully with, the numbers. I know numbers are fluctuating daily. So I think we just have to get through this, power through. And then I'm not sure the vaccine mandate, it really sounds like they're trying to kick the can down the road. I don't think anybody wants to deal with that right now. So I guess it's a wait and see kind of moment. And then for critical race theory, we haven't heard anything recently on that.
There's not chatter at all.
Yeah, it definitely got heated in the springtime. A lot of schools had a lot of issues, but it seems like maybe that was an insulated thing. I know Saratoga Springs had an issue, but I haven't heard much else since then. So I guess that's another one. We'll wait and see.
There was the SED guidance that was issued, or that I think it just became effective on the seal of civic readiness, and some of the conversations centered on that. But other than that, which didn't particularly directly address that issue, we haven't heard a whole lot. A lot of these things, particularly the health issues, the public health issues, will change as circumstances change. So all we really can do is stay in contact with our contacts at Department of Health, our contacts at SED in particular, and our contacts in the governor's office. But that's really, it's sort of not a great answer, because we're really just in a gray area right now, especially with the transition of administrations.
Any other questions?
Anybody? Thank you very much. You've been very informative. Appreciate your time. And I'm guessing one of us will well, I'm pretty sure one of us will be getting back to you with some more follow-up questions. We have a meeting in October where we kind of try to put our paper together then, so we can get that out. And then our big event is in January, where we invite all of our legislators in and get a chance to talk to them. And that's something we've been doing for a long time now. We get a pretty good turnout for that, and all of our area legislators show up for that. And we get between 100 and 200 people out to talk to them. And that's been a good program going on for a while now.
Well, great.
Sounds
Any
great,
assistance
yeah.
we can provide, let us know.
Thank you.
very much for your help.
Of course.
Thank you to all of you.
All
Thank you,
thanks,
everybody.
Everyone.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.